Good morning. My name is Brad Wheeler. I am Vice President for Information Technology, and I'm delighted to welcome you to this year's Statewide IT Conference. We wouldn't have such a fine event and such a good breakfast out there if it was not for our sponsors who make all of this possible. So with that, let me give a special shout out to our Lux sponsors, the Peer Group, HP Enterprise, and the Center of Excellence for Women in Technology. I think I saw Chad is here from Peer. I'm sure Maureen is here with us as well. And to all of our sponsors who make this event possible. We couldn't do it without them, so thank you for your continued support as we pull this off year after year. So here we are, the smart machine. There we are. Here we are, the smart machine and me. So much to think about as we look into the future ahead of us. So as you hear the talk today, our speakers who come in, you can tweet your questions to Statewide IT18, and some of them will be fed to me for Q&A. We've got a good setup this morning. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about where we're going with the smart machine. I'll follow by bringing on Cate, an expert. Many of you know, and I'll introduce him appropriately at that time. Shortly after break, we're going to add about 500 very special guests to this room. And then, of course, our very, very special guest, astronaut Mae Jemison. Dr. Mae Jemison, we're delighted to have her come and join us. Now, it was just a year ago that we were sitting here with our first conversation in the age of the smart machine. It was a beautiful gathering. You recall we had Dr. Shoshana Zuboff of the Harvard Business School, who gave us a lot of insights and thoughts about where this might be going, and the most terrifying speech on cybersecurity I've ever heard from Dan Geer. I still sleep with the pillow over my head at night. We do have his remarks. He was gracious enough to share them with us in written form, and those are available if you didn't see them, and the video is posted from last year. So we started this discussion of in the age of the smart machine. And the reason I wanted to start that discussion last year and continue it this year, those of you who are old enough, think back to 1980, 1984, 1986. This PC came in an era when it was mid-range computers, mainframe computers, and then some years hence, if it wasn't written to really work and interact with a PC through client server or other things, you were really just in an old space. I think that's the march ahead of us. We are in an era of understanding where we are going with the smart machine going forward. So I'll ask you this question. 1 year has elapsed. What has happened? In your own life, do you have experiences? Have you seen or felt the machine getting smarter? So as I was putting this presentation together, I had Office 2019 installed, latest, greatest, shiniest version. So here's what happened. I had it installed, and I was working on a slide, and I thought, okay, we need a slide for sponsors, so I typed just a holding word, sponsors, and I clicked OK, and when I did that, then the machine gave me this set of abominations of, could we distort your beautiful slide in some way, Maria's work, taint it with some visual abomination like that? I responded quickly by clicking no, go away, and my experience was, dumb machine. So this is part of the challenge in the journey that we're headed into. Just because we have some data, because we can do some training, what is the experience on the other end? Now, I'll encourage you, watch the presentation. You'll see a note where I did concede. Okay, machine, you got a pretty good idea on that one. I'll take your suggestion and we'll do it your way. So let's review some goals and the road ahead. And I say review because some of these we talked about a little bit at the UITS lunch last year. So I want us to focus on the services and thoughts of where this could go for IU over time, our evolving services, how that's going to happen, who does what in getting the machine into our services for some better service outcomes, and then finally, looking ahead. What are we going to do? How are we going to get there as we go? So some of you have been in a talk I gave that says, if we think about interactions with computer systems and data, we've gone through several eras. So we have done era transitions before as the world changes. So paper-based processes in physical locations. You want to drop a class, walk all the way across campus, fill out some form, walk all the way back to the other side of campus, get someone else to sign it, walk all the way back to someone else to sign it. We've all seen that. Then we got to the stage where, well, there was a computer system, but it was behind a gate. You had to go see the expert, and he or she was the service interaction that you got sent to do that. But then for about the last 20 years, our head has been entirely consumed with this idea of self-service, outsourced to the customer. Can we enable customers to take on these things themselves? And that's where everything's going. It's win-win. And of course, the second step of that is not just to computers, but to your mobile phone. So by and large, that is where much of the activity in the world is today, is continuing to make self-service better and better in the mobile-first experience. But what I really want is not the ability to go do that. What I really want is delegation. Rosie, bring me my drink, please, for the Jetsons fans. Rosie, take care of the laundry, please. I'd like to delegate tasks to the machine to take them on for me, but that's not really what I want. What I really want isn't delegation. I want anticipation. That a couple things happen. Okay, I know I'm going to need to do a certain thing, and the machine has either done it for me, or it may just ask me, I anticipate you're going to need to do X or Y, and it will take that on. So the focus for us is delegation and anticipation in where we are going with the smart machine. So this morning I woke up, this was a headline from last night in the Chronicle of Higher Education. MIT is investing $1 billion to start up a new school on the effects of artificial intelligence. Holistically, societally, technologically, economically. I think it probably helped that they had a $350 million lead gift from a hedge fund guy. But I love the way this was written here. Artificial intelligence, or machine learning, involves the development of software that, just like the human brain, takes data, weighs it, makes a decision, and often takes an action, all without human intervention. Commonly known as AI, it is already revolutionizing such fields as customer service calls and transportation, though it also carries concerns on the implications of machines taking the place of human beings. And we know in some situations, we will give tasks to the machine. It will do them. And we also know there will be a lot of working jobs in figuring out how to teach and tune and steer the machine to where we want it to go. So I applaud MIT in this investment. So 2 examples recently, things that are going on this year that you've probably experienced as well. If we think about travel and we think about what's going on in our home as early indicators. So travel looks a lot like this. You know, you've got an airline reservation system. You've got you got a situation over here. You can talk to an agent, or increasingly you can do this on your phone. Fred, Cate, and I were supposed to go to North Carolina last week as the hurricane was coming up from the south. On Wednesday, we both could smell this is not going to go well. This is just not going to go well. We bailed out on Wednesday because I had to be back on Thursday, and sure enough, what happened Thursday morning? All the flights back had canceled. You could just smell it. Well, what we'd like is not only the transaction of dealing with that, but we would like the artificial intelligence to make inferences and help to give us better advice about that. Delta's apps, United's apps are getting better, that when drama starts happening, rather than enabling you to go find something, it's starting to anticipate. You probably still want to get home. Here are your options. You may not like them, but here are your options. Would you like to grab one, or do you want to go pout and stand in line? And you know, I like that help. But not only the airlines. Google says a bunch of that data is out there. I can train my own machine. My machine will tell you, when you're about to book this flight from Indianapolis to Washington, D.C., the probability of it being on time is way low. So don't cut it too close. We get that information from Google punched to our phone already. And you surely know what's going on at home. If you're not talking to your home, you can get out your phone now and order some things so you can install them tomorrow when you get home. I can't imagine not being able to talk to your home and have all sorts of things happen. So we see the race is on for home, and you go, yeah, that's the consumer, that's the home market. But a year ago, we saw Arizona State University, and this year, the University of St. Louis, starting to put Alexas. ASU put them in the engineering dorms. St. Louis University has put them in all dorms. Many students have unplugged them for obvious reasons of people going down the hallway and go, wake me up at 4 a.m., you know. Typical dorm, yeah, that's happening. So we got a lot to learn about what we want the machine to do. But these examples from home and the consumer space, which is where the large market is, they're going fast and they are coming our way of the touchless internet and the ability to delegate and anticipate. So if we think a little bit more about how this actually happens as it goes forward, we need to think some about how will we enable anticipation and delegation of services at Indiana University. So some of you have seen this. This is going to be our framework. I previewed it last year at the luncheon. First is our goal. If we don't know what we're doing, we can waste a lot of money and time and goodwill. So what is our goal? Is our goal to help with retention on all of our campuses, so the smart machine is able to understand and advise and give students some signals that maybe even their professor or their advisor is unable to do? Is our goal to simplify something that's taking time? Is our goal to take cost out of a particular process? What is our goal that we're trying to achieve as we do this? Second, what data will be needed to help educate the machine? So all the folks who are doing service interactions, or students who are doing service interactions, or faculty and staff, they've relied on some data, and there's some access to it, and someone taught them. How are we going to use the data, and what data are required under what policies? We're going to need some machine learning. Now, this is fairly commoditized stuff. I remember studying artificial intelligence in a master's level class in a year I won't disclose. And by and large, it's the same stuff. Backpropagation and the algorithms coming forward, they're abundantly available as tools or in platforms, as I'll mention. So we're going to need some of the machine learning. And then finally, what's the interface going to be in the end? Is it going to be something wearable? Is it going to be a mobile device? Is it going to be a screen? What's that interface going to be? And then how will we run a loop to learn and improve? So I think part of the challenge is, are we going to think about piecing this stuff together over time? Or are we going to say, wow, there's some super smart platforms out there where big software companies have already done some of this work and sewn things together, and maybe the platforms will do it. So point number 3, on this journey, who does what? What is it that I'm going to do, whether you're a system administrator, you're a systems analyst, you're a software engineer, you're a customer service specialist, you're in charge of enrollment. What is it that you're going to do? What does the machine do? So who does what as this goes forward? So we can think about some of the goals, some of the roles that need to be done. First, who's going to establish the goals and sequence them? Let's say we've got a service that we know just irritates the heck out of the faculty. Fred's Cate, I'll introduce in a moment. He's vice president for research. He shares with me on occasion that sometimes our systems are not always delightful experiences for the faculty. When I go to faculty events, they share personally with me. And I am still the personal help desk for each of my faculty colleagues in the Kelley School. But so what are our goals? Do we need to work on a faculty accommodation first? Are we working on a student system? Or is it something related to the res halls? Who is going to establish those goals and sequence them? Second, what about the data? Where does the data come from? What are the policies? What are the rules around making the data available? Who is going to train the machine? Now, in that algorithm I was showing you, the TensorFlow illustration there of machine learning, there are a lot of different ways you can train the machine. You just don't go, hey, machine, here's a bucket of data. Chew through that. There's a lot of crafting of what the machine learns and how it goes about it. A lot of engineering in doing that. And finally, how are we going to connect it to human interfaces? And we have to think, what does that actually mean? Think back to my airline example. Did you notice the arrow where it went with the artificial intelligence in the middle? It went up to the service desk operators, and it went down into the mobile platform, but it didn't go to the individual. The artificial intelligence was making the agent smarter and helping him anticipate what was happening next. It was going to the mobile device where the consumer was already having an experience. It wasn't directly connecting the individual to the AI engine. Sometimes we may do it. Sometimes we may just make our transaction system smarter, and we don't even have to really look at how we're connecting it ultimately to a human interface in the end. So this is what it looks like. Data, machine learning, whether we use TensorFlow or some of the platforms or other things that I'll show you, and then delegated, anticipated, and valued service experiences coming out. So let's look ahead just a moment, and I think we've got some decisions to make over the coming year. I'll be candid. I thought we might have more of those made already from where we were at last year. But sometimes really things are a matter of timing. I remember UPS, the big truck or the big delivery company, major competitor to FedEx in the early 1990s. They went all in and implemented throughout the entirety of UPS machines and devices, some fairly expensive PCs running on an operating system called OS2. You remember that one? That was a collaboration between IBM and Microsoft until they decided they didn't like each other, and they killed the project, and UPS ended up having to re-implement and pull everything off of a whole OS that they had architected around. So going too early can sometimes be a bad thing. So we've been thinking about this in the road ahead. When, at what pace, what increment can the machine start being brought year by year into improving services at Indiana University? I'll tell you what I think. I think platforms are presumed to prevail because the numbers of integrations, the varied sets of data, the machines learn best on larger and larger data sources. I think we'll have to have our head around that the major platforms, and when I say platforms, we have Google Cloud Platform, that's one of the very big ones. Salesforce is a big platform, I'll make mention of it in a moment with its Einstein engine. Piece by piece by piece, when you look at the news, every company out there that has a major foothold is embedding machine learning in its platform and what it does. And I don't think we're going to want to chase all of them. Alternatively, there's a bunch of tools available. You can, like I say, right now, you can go run TensorFlow open source. You can buy all sorts of algorithms and run them locally with never touching one of those platforms. So we're going to have to make some decisions. How will we go about architecting our smart machine environment over time? So perhaps there are some insights from things that we learn about acquiring platforms over time. And I think this is really an important one. So this is an illustration of our student system. This isn't the latest illustration, and I know Lori Sullivan's eyes are rolling at me right now, but this is an illustration of our student system. And what this represents is in the core of this student system is PeopleSoft. It is the big transaction engine. That's where students add and drop courses, what courses are available, where the grades are maintained for the registrar. We process over $1 billion of financial aid every year. This is a workhorse beast in the middle. But over the years, we've learned there are other things we want to do. We want to do them differently. We want to do them faster. Maybe the platform does them, but we don't want to do them the way the platform does. So with our constituents and stakeholders, we start to buy other things and do integration, or we build some things and do integrations. And so where are we at today in this? By my count, 9 major modules in the platform, 49 integrations that we can speak of. And there are others that are unspeakable. So we have a lot of work to do to keep this thing sewn together. And this isn't good, this isn't bad. If you go to any large university, you're going to find something like this. because the needs have evolved so much in trying to sew them together over time. So at the beginning of this era, as we head into building the smart machine to serve the constituents of Indiana University over the next decade, what do we want that map to look like in 2025, 2028? We have an opportunity to think about that. So when I think about how platforms are growing in prominence, we see some of the ecosystem coming together in some domains already. It seems to me there are only two kinds of universities out here, particularly in the United States, regarding their learning management system. Those who have implemented Canvas and those who will soon implement Canvas. So that's really kind of the dichotomy of where that is at right now. So we've implemented Canvas, and we've got quite a rich ecosystem around it. I counted 40 integrations of Top Hat, Turnitin, McGraw-Hill text, things like that, all built around it. But we're not maintaining all those integrations. A lot of them are with standards that IMS Global has put forth. A lot of them are pretty lightweight integrations. A lot of those companies are building their product to plug right into Canvas, so it's sort of pre-integrated out there. So that's integrations and growth through an ecosystem and some homegrown things that we have here as well. If you've been tracking our Salesforce implementation and you know much about it, and this is a complex diagram beyond the moment to explain right now, other than we call this the Salesforce measles diagram. And what this shows is the little pockets of Salesforce that we have all over the university and a few other things that we're using to recruit students, to communicate with students, faculty, and staff who are here, that we're using in alumni relations, fundraising, and other things. So as most of you know, late last January, we announced an enterprise move to the Salesforce platform. We're pulling those things together. Cate, Chris Tompkins, many of you in other functional areas, we are really driving a lot of consolidation there. Now, I went to Dreamforce a couple of weeks ago. When you're at Dreamforce, you're contending for food and water and resources with 150,000 visitors to San Francisco. But it was quite an experience. One of the things, of course, a big platform provider is pushing is their AI. So it has some built-in capabilities for Einstein. So if you think about it, it's going to have data, a lot of data already connected to it. It's got some algorithms built into it, and it's got user interfaces. So to what extent do we want to really go in deeper with this as a platform with Einstein as their engine, or do we want to think about others? So if we're going to improve the services at Indiana University, raw materials, our goals, what are we trying to do? What data are needed? What software, homegrown, things that we do ourselves, multiple platforms. I don't know that there's a single platform. And then what will we do with it at the end? What's the user experience? Does it connect to a system we've already got? Is it something new? Does it support a human in helping to give someone better advice? Where will we connect it? So if the machine learns from data, one of our challenges is then, how do we take all of these data sources that we've got at IU, because we have lots of data? How are we going to decide how we're going to feed the machine to help us achieve the goals that we're after? Which tools, which platform, which machine? Is it their machine on a platform? Is it our machine using open source learning algorithms that we build ourselves? These are some of the challenges ahead of us. One of the big challenges though, in feeding the machine is understanding who owns the data. What are the rules around it? We heard a little bit from Shoshana Zuboff last year with some concerns. We see that the machines and the platforms, they want to eat the world right now, so that they can get smarter. So to unwind that mystery and get to a point of clarity and insight about this, it's time to summon up our own local expert, Dr. Fred Cate, to come up for an interview to tell us what we're going to do in the road ahead. Fred, will you come up and please join us? So welcome, Fred. Glad to have you back on the stage. I think some members of the audience will recall that you've been here before. And it was just some years ago that you were giving your campaign stump speech.
Yes, I recall.
And I think you were saying something like, this idiot across the stage, this cloud thing is a fad, it's just going to go away. But yet here we are 8 years later still talking about this. So I'm glad you're hanging with us to help figure this out in some way.
Brad, I'd do anything just to get to see those socks.
I have a large array of socks, and they're all color organized, as you might expect.
I totally would.
So, Fred, this summer, when you and I were talking, you had hosted an event out in California that was bringing together thoughts about law and artificial intelligence and policy and data. So why don't you catch the audience up just a little bit on that event that you hosted?
Thank you very much. So one of the really interesting challenges around AI is the fact that the law, as is always the case, has nowhere near caught up. So we did this event actually at Google headquarters in San Francisco. A bunch of tech companies, a bunch of other companies that you might not think of in this space. MasterCard was there and other financial services companies. And we invited regulators in from across the Asia-Pacific region for what was effectively a one-day tutorial about AI and the privacy issues that it poses. And it was a really striking event because one of the things that the presenters, and they did a great job, they spoke in very short, small, single-syllable words so that those of us who are lawyers in the room could understand them. And they were talking about the way that AI uses data, the way that machine learning draws on data. And what rapidly became clear is that the reality of the technology and the reality of the law are 100% missing each other. So the law runs the risk of both slowing down the development of AI, could be a good thing, could be a bad thing, but it's not the intended thing. But also it runs the risk of completely not protecting privacy in the context of these advanced digital technologies.
Yeah, I put a quote up here that you sent to me in an email message, and I thought it was really good enough to share, highlighting what that tension actually is. So if you dig into that tension just a little bit further, the law's not keeping up, but don't you think human and social concerns about our data aren't keeping up, as well as the folks who say, look, I want my machine to be smarter, I want to suck in the entire universe, because then I can make my machine smarter. What did you guys learn? I mean, evolving the law is a thing, but evolving social perception and policy relative to what it takes to feed the machine, where did the discussion go on that?
So I think it's pretty fair to say, although this might not be an audience that would appreciate it, it's probably unreasonable to expect people to understand AI. In other words, most of us don't. People who work in it don't understand it. In fact, one of the things they often say is we don't really understand why this outcome occurred. It's one of the reasons we need human oversight. We need data in order to test the outcome. And so I think if we think the public is going to understand it either, that's probably not likely to happen. So this may be one time we really need to think about policy within organizations and law as a driver or an informer of those policies, so that we don't say you should protect yourself, something you really can't do in the face of most digital technologies. Rather, we say this is a place in which you should be protected by the people who are collecting and using the data. But that doesn't mean not using the data. And it doesn't mean asking for these meaningless consents. So think about it. Thanks to the General Data Protection Regulation, which took effect in May in Europe, now every time we click on a website anywhere, we get the first pop-up is, this site uses cookies, do you agree?
It uses electrons, it uses ones and
exactly.
zeros.
And you're going to be breathing air while you use it, and do you agree? And the neat thing about this is we do data surveys on this. 97% of people have no idea what a cookie is. So that pop-up is utterly meaningless. Let me say, by the way, we have one at IU as well. If you go to look at your paycheck, you instantly get a pop-up saying, this is sensitive financial information. Like, I'm surprised. I thought my paycheck was not. Do you agree? And I'm like, you know what you're after. If you've gotten to that point, aren't you for certain going to agree?
Let me just affirm for the audience that most of the irritating things like that at IU are gifts of your profession.
We're the gift that keeps on giving.
Yeah, and let me also affirm, if Jackie Simmons was here, she's our Indiana University General Counsel. her impatience with bureaucracy and getting rid of things that really have no material protection for IU or use is exceeded only by Fred's. And Fred, by the way, is the instigator that got PRAB set up a couple of years ago, where some of you have emailed suggestions about how to make these things better at iu.edu. I'm going to remind you, if you have questions that you want to ask to me or to Fred, you can tweet them to Statewide IT 18, Statewide IT 18, or email them directly. We'll take some questions as we get a little bit further along in doing this. So I think the public has become just a little bit immune. So yesterday I went to the Wall Street Journal, and it popped up, and I had Ghostery running on Firefox, and it says this site has 60 trackers and ads and such. And I don't know, I suspect it's a pretty small percentage of the population that even turns on any of this stuff or manages it, and you just deal with it. And we get to a point that we're just kind of used to this. Like, you know, one day on a weekend, I realized there's a drip in that shower upstairs. I probably need to go ahead and replace the shower head, and I'm out running errands, so I just pick up a shower head, you know, or maybe I look on Amazon or look at a couple of models, and, you know, so I'm out for groceries, I just pick up a cheap shower head and install it. And then what happens? You know, for 3 months, I'm stalked on site after site after site that I've never been to before with ads about shower heads. That's kind of the creepiness that I think most of the public has sort of come to become numb to.
Yeah, but it's not creepiness, it's bad use of technology. In other words, the alternative is you're just going to get ads you're completely not interested in. You'll be getting ads for all sorts of things you don't care about. You know, cargo shorts or things that one could never imagine you in. So what we want is we want the AI to work. We want it to be smart. And so it's not that good. I mean, it's really bad if you think about it. And airlines are the absolute worst. You know, you buy a ticket to Turkey, the one and only time in your life you're going to Turkey, and for the next 6 months, Delta is advertising Turkey to you. Well, if they used AI, they would know you're not going back to Turkey. That's the one place they should not be advertising for you. Yeah. So it's not a question about the technology, good or bad. It's a question about how we're using it. Maybe we need to give it better data. We need to give it stronger user feedback to say, stop advertising this stuff I'm not interested in.
Right, and Google's AdSense
lets you do it.
Does let you kind of thumbs up, thumbs down, show me more or less of this. There is a certain company that I do pick up some good shoes from on occasion, and their CRM system is dumb as a rock, because I do not need to know there's a flash sale on women's wear that day. You know, just not a thing, you know, so I don't know why they, you know, keep sending that my way, and just they spam and just send out everything and doing this. So let's talk a little bit about the work at IU. So now let's get serious about if we're going to improve services and we're going to use the smart machine incrementally along the way. And I said we got a lot of data. So how do we go about establishing IU's data privacy principles? And so you and I have already had just a little bit of discussion about this with appropriate beverages. So let's just start with number one. Is notification required? Do I need that little pop-up, that cookie site that says, hey, this is technology, we're using it, let me give you a little geekism here. You okay with that? Because otherwise nothing's going to happen on this website. I mean, do I need to notify people? And if so, what notification is actually needed and when?
So can I just answer all the questions? It'll save time.
Well, if you're going to dig in, can someone give this to Sarah Chambers? Because where we're going as our privacy officer, she's probably going to need to fan herself for what he's about to say.
So these principles were developed in the 1970s, and they were enacted into law in 1980 when the OECD adopted the OECD privacy guidelines. And it's a very transactional model of privacy. I'm going to ask you for your data. I'm going to tell you what I'm going to use it for. You're going to agree to that. I'm going to take your data, and I'm going to use it consistent to that. If you want to stop me, you can stop me. You can have it deleted. You can get a copy of it. It's very transactional. It has never worked, not ever, because even by 1980, we were moving data too fast for this system to work. Moreover, the way we've applied it, and frankly, industry has led the way in applying this badly, and that is we can get people to consent to anything. I mean, absolutely anything. So like the little pop-up when I want to see my paycheck, the choice is not consent or not consent, it's consent or don't see your paycheck. And so you can make yourself feel better by saying, you got my consent to see this. The lawyers can make themselves feel better. But in reality, there was no consent there whatsoever. That was all a legal illusion, and we do that all the time. So notice, sure, it might be useful in a specific situation. In other words, I think it's great that Apple asks you, you're on an app, it says, this app wants to use your contacts. That's good notice. It's meaningful, it's timely, and I don't know why my map software needs to see my contacts. And then consent says yes or no. And I say, no, I don't want it to use my contacts.
You're talking about Waze.
That makes perfect sense. It does it for dozens of apps that you have no business being where they are. But asking about consent where you have no choice about it, or where the notice is meaningless, or where it uses terms the consumer will never understand, or moreover, in areas in which the public benefit is so great, think about medical research. Why would we ever let an individual say, no, don't include my data in that research study, when that research study is going to save lives?
And in that case, often it is an anonymized research study.
Exactly. And so these principles, it's not that they could never apply, it's not that there's never a setting in which they would apply, it's that in the vast majority of settings in which we are using data, we're collecting data, we're doing something with data, they just don't make any sense. And AI is the perfect example, like, show me. Well, go ahead, explain AI to somebody on the street. I encourage you to do that. Let me know how that works for you. Instead, what we may need to be able to tell people there is what were the alternatives. In other words, you got this credit score, some people got this one, some people got this one, so now you know something meaningful about where your data, as this AI was applied to it, ended up.
I think that's right. So in laying these out, and I appreciate it, I'm teasing Sarah a little bit, but Sarah works very, very hard, Sarah and her team, on our IT privacy and keeping us in the right space on this. Some of it is legal and regulatory around FERPA data, HIPAA rules with medical information, and some of it is the art of our choice in figuring out what we're going to do here. So our friends up at Purdue, they've been working pretty hard to take a wealth of data available to them, sitting there on their systems. They didn't even have to do a single thing to cause it to start happening, and starting to use it in ways and integrate it to try to get greater insights to feed back to a good for the students to help them understand some of what may help them in school or may not. Now, so do we need an express notification? And I'm going to dig into this a little bit because we've got some decisions on the horizon. So do we need an express notification that every time you touch Wi-Fi, I say, we have access points and we can triangulate pretty much where you are? You know, we knew which dorm you live in. We know which dorm you stayed in last night. We know where you have lunch. We know with Crimson Card who you have lunch with most likely. It seems pretty frequently. We get swipes one or two behind each other. We know that you said you didn't get that assignment in, but Canvas has no record of you ever looking at that assignment to know it. So how far do we go, or do we, in specific notifications about this and seeking specific consent, or do we just say, hey, you want an IU user ID? Okay, when you come on to be at IU, we're going to use our data, all this stuff, your digital footprints as you run around. We're not going to be bad with it, but we're going to try to make things better. How far do we go on number one and number two?
So I think the answer there really has to do with 3, 4, and 5. In other words, with what are you going to do with the data? And so if you're going to use the data in some way that's not shocking or surprising, or that's not intrusive, I'm not sure you need to tell them that you're using it for the way it was intended. You swipe a credit card, do they really need to tell you, we're going to use this credit card to get paid? We're going to go to your bank, find out if it's a valid number. I mean, that seems like obvious. Why else do you use a card?
And so this was part of your thesis, and this is somewhat new thinking for us to get our head around whether we want to go this way or not. We are working and we are thinking in the paradigm that you described from the beginning. What rules, what assertions govern transactions?
And part of this is also making certain that we have the internal systems to make sure that the commitments we do make, we can keep. So if we say this data will never be used to market to you, do we have the capacity to live up to that promise? If we better, because that is both a legal problem, but it's also an ethical problem. If you're making commitments, you're not. And again, we find this, we do focus groups all the time with patients in the healthcare system. And they don't mind at all their data being used for research. In fact, to a person, they think it is and should be used for research. And they are shocked when they hear that federal law says, no, 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 we got to get your consent first, or consent of an IRB. But they don't want to be contacted. They do not want to be contacted. Above all else, their number one concern is don't contact me. And therefore, calling them to ask for their consent is already violating their first rule, don't contact me. And so we got to think it through. If you're using data in a way that serves a valid public purpose, poses little or no risk to the individual, is not intrusive, is not going to embarrass them or intrude into their lives, it may be better maybe you make a privacy policy available someplace so that the advocates, the people who study these things, the lawyers could go in and find it, but maybe not to inundate individuals with notice about things they can't control or with consent opportunities where there's no rational basis for consent.
I wanted to follow up on your example in the mobile phone. I had to reinstall Waze some time ago, and when I reinstalled it, it said, I need access to your contacts. And I said, no, you don't. And I said no, and it exited. And I thought, well, that's just rude. And so, a few days later, I thought, I'm going to try that again. So I launched it, same thing. It wasn't going to let me proceed without access to my contacts. I thought, well, let's see if they really want me to use it or not. So I just let it sit there. About 10 minutes, it just went on and let me use it. So this is one of those situations that almost felt extortionary on the way in, but they wanted me as a customer, but they wanted to bait me into doing something. So principle number 4 there says, on demand, give me my data. So if you walk into Kroger down here and say, hello, I'm Brad Wheeler, here is my little fob, and could you just give me a printout of all my data for the last 5 years? Okay. Or here's a thumb drive, very few viruses on it. What could you give it to me? Okay, well, what would you actually do with it? So I'm curious. Here's an example from LinkedIn. You may a Microsoft company. You may recall a few years ago, they decided to add this feature of give me my data. So I thought that was curious. I went out there and said, spit it up, let's have it. So it gave me about 8 Excel spreadsheets in CSV format. I didn't know what to do with it. I felt better that I could download it. So at IU, as we work through these things, do we feel like we need to say to a student, to a professor, to a visitor to campus, that there's some button you go out there and push and we'll burp it all up and give it to you. Here's all the stuff we know about you in just some raw form. Is that would take a lot of work. And it'd take a lot of concerns about maintaining legal standards and things such as that. Do we need to bother with that, or no, don't bother with that?
So it's a terrible idea, actually, because remember, the place you get into trouble is when you give the data to the wrong person. So the first thing you're going to have to do is make them verify their identity. So I want to find out what you've got about me, and so I've got to produce a passport. I've got to show it to a person because you've got to compare. You've got to have a human doing this. There'll be no button stuff. You'll be having to actually verify. You'll have to authenticate. Then you'll provide a bunch of meaningless data, which, by the way, it will be decades before we can provide all the data we know about somebody. So what we'd have to say is, in this silo, this is what we know about you. Now, if you're talking about a specific setting, like the library is chasing me for a book it says I haven't returned, and I say, show me the evidence that I checked out this book, it seems perfectly reasonable that the library has to show me that evidence. But saying, show me every inference your AI system has made about me, that seems a little less useful.
Yeah, so if we go back to the principles here, then you're saying strike out number 4, give me my data, it's not worth it.
I'm saying it should be never used as a principle. It doesn't do a thing to protect privacy. It's just an add-on. This is what happened when a bunch of lawyers at the OECD sat down together and said, what can we glom onto this thing we call privacy? It's just like consent. I mean, remember, the Institutes of Medicine issued a wonderful report on consent maybe 8 years ago, and they noted consent and privacy are irrelevant to each other. You can have consent and still invade privacy. You can do the reverse. You can have no consent and still protect privacy. So if we're talking about data privacy principles, the head of your slide, I would think about things that would really matter for privacy, and those aren't them.
Okay, so what about number 3? A student, a professor, or someone asserts to us, I don't want you to have any of my data. So yes, I want to use your Wi-Fi. Yes, I understand that your network logs my MAC address and IP address as I move around. I do not wish for you to have it. I do not wish for you to use it in training your machine. I don't want you to stay up at bed at night and read it on your own just to help fall asleep. I want it gone. Should we be compelled and feel obligated to delete that data?
I mean, no. At some point, I'm just going to get apocalyptic here. I mean, this is, my blood pressure is going up. So it might very well be that there are uses of the data we should not be allowed to make. I think marketing might be pretty high on that list. I think if an alumni says, I don't want you to contact me again for a donation, I think suddenly you would block that information. You got to keep it because you got to know that they are on the do not call list. But nevertheless, I think it's perfectly reasonable to say we should extend some choices to individuals.
Right, like an alumnus calling us up saying, delete my data. Say, okay, well, we have no record you graduated in 1976.
Exactly, and therefore we can't do it.
Yeah.
And it's a problem both ways. In other words, both the individual wants his or her data deleted. There are often reasons you don't want to do it. But it's also important the other way, which is you need an intact data set. When we say there were X number of students admitted to IU this year, we need to actually show there were X number. And if you can delete a third of them, suddenly there's only 2/3 of X. And so at some point, intact data sets are going to matter.
So show me, just to make sure you understand what I'm thinking when we discuss show me, is show me trying to, it is trying to say, yes, we are mopping up all this data about you. By the way, that's happening everywhere you go. Every surveillance camera you walk by, and every mall and sporting event, and everything that you go in and out of gates and such. So this is a societal thing, as Shoshana Zuboff talked about a little bit last year. But in general, we don't know where that data goes or what it's being used for. It's shown me saying, I want to go look at the Brad dashboard. So here's the Brad dashboard at IU, and I can get some idea about data in use in a valuable way. And if it says, well, relative to other employees, you tend to spend about 90% more time on the network. Okay, I do. I mean, are there things, or for students? Well, relative to other freshmen who are taking the class load that you're doing, here are some of the things that we're seeing. Can we give them value back with that data? We're sharing. We could have an insight, but we're often looking at insights for the masses. Say, well, here, we'll give you a dashboard. Here's the insight for you relative to the masses if you find that interesting. We haven't explored that area much at all. But in these principles, we have a lot to think about. Let me move us along here a little bit more. And the question, my slide got murdered here, that did all fit in there, of, do we really get to a point, what worries us most is, if this data has to be mopped up to make all these things work, okay, I still go to bed at night, I still wake up, it's not really a big deal. They're not invading my privacy of calling all the time, things like that. But don't we really worry about who's going to decide, and is it going to be used for goodness, or is it going to be used for, something from the gates of hell? I mean, isn't that what worries us most? And a general mistrust of folks who have power because they have that.
Yeah, I think that's very much the case. And, I mentioned the focus groups about the medical patients earlier. Their second concern after being called is they were worried their insurance would be canceled. Well, interestingly, insurance can't be canceled by law because of the information in your medical record. And so the use issue had been dealt with. They didn't know that. That's not their fault. There's a lot to know out there. But focusing on how we use data and how those decisions are made and how we verify that we are living up to those decisions. So if we say we don't use data for X, can we actually prove we don't use data for X? Or if we say we collect your data and we keep it secure, a promise a number of folks have learned not to make, do we keep it secure?
Well, you just used a phrase there, so I've got a little edit there. When it says, so is it my data? Is it our data? Is it their data? Is it its data? So I walk around in this auditorium, I go over to the IMU, We've got Wi-Fi pings of where you're at. Your cellular company has pings off the cell towers of where you're at. If your phone's chatty with GPS, certain apps may know where you're at. I mean, there's stuff streaming out of our behavior all the time. Who owns that data? I mean, do I own my data of walking around? And AT&T does not. I own that data. Or is that data, it belongs to AT&T. When I signed up for AT&T, they gave me notice, which I paid no attention to. And so therefore, it's not really my data. Because the debate often goes, oh, it's Fred's data, and Fred has to be informed and transactionally consent. Or is it, to your point, it's not your data anyway?
Yeah, so this is one area. The law is unambiguous. It might be wrong, but it's unambiguous, and that is, it is the data of the party that collects it. And so try it. You don't own your street address, you don't own your zip code, you don't own any of that information. That is all owned by the post office or by the city. And similarly, my prescription history is owned by the pharmacy that collects it. They insure it, they store it, they guard it, they're liable for it. I have absolutely no ownership interest. I have some rights under law. For example, I can get to see it. And that's for data portability. That serves a very specific purpose, so that like my doctor has to give me my own x-rays so I can go see another doctor and take the same x-rays. It makes perfect sense why that would be a requirement. But at no point do I own those x-rays. Those x-rays are owned by the doctor or owned by the place where they were taken.
So the question then becomes, how will we know? As you say, they may collect the data, and they may collect it under certain assertions. It is our data. It won't be used for certain purposes. But then how will we ensure and know that we can honor those purposes that we set? That would argue, would it not, for asserting fewer purposes and restrictions up front in the eyes of the organization?
Yes, I actually increasingly am becoming attracted to this idea of having sort of the data review board equivalent of what we normally think of as an IRB in a medical research setting or a human subjects committee. These are organizations set up with some basic legal constraints, but they operate independently. And their purpose is to say, you're going to be doing some stuff that could pose risks, and what we want to do is evaluate why you're doing it, what the risks are, what your protections are to guard against those risks, and then bless what you're going to do. And they're independent, but they're in the organization.
So putting an independent review step.
Exactly.
Rather than, Dave Gent with Networks going, hey, I'm just going to throw all the IU log data up to TensorFlow and tweak a few variables, and we'll just see what happens.
Right, but again,
he'd probably have Steve Wallace do that, not him.
And Steve would never do that. So, but not just having, we've used, for example, the data stewards to look at things. Yep. And data stewards are useful for assessing the liability of the organization, but they're not terribly good at thinking about the issue holistically. And so data review boards are really sort of coming into vogue now. They're now required by law in Europe in certain settings. And what they do is they help make the organization stop, analyze, and document a decision. So why did you say it was okay to take all the student data and use it to do X? So that then later, if the issue comes up, you can say, look, that wasn't just Dave Gent making this decision. Rather, it was a well thought out.
Just like the IRB, Institutional Review Boards for human subjects,
exactly.
It's a stop. You have to document. What are you going to do? I mean, it's no longer the, I guess, the era of decades ago where someone might go, what? I didn't shock them that hard. There's actually a review step of what's the utility and why are we doing it. Well, the Freakout book on this is coming out in January. Shoshana Zuboff, who was here last year, remember she talked about this word surveillance capitalism, and her book is coming out. It's a very scholarly book. If you picked up her former one, you know that she doesn't write briefly. It's about 400, 500 pages. I think in the age of surveillance capitalism, here's the comment that pops out. In the age of surveillance capitalism, is neither a hand-wringing narrative of danger and decline nor a digital fairy tale. Rather, it offers a deeply reasoned and evocative examination of the contest over the next chapter of capitalism that will decide the meaning of information civilization in the 21st century. The stark issue at hand is whether we'll be the masters of our information and the machines or its slaves. I don't think we're looking to enslave anyone, but these are the concerns that we think about. And one of the tensions that we face over time, we've long known and seen this thought: put your phone down, feed your mind, read a book, get out and do something, take an art class, go paint, go spend time with a 3-year-old. Open your mind, feed your mind. So, how do we go about feeding our mind with all of these things? Then when we talk about we have a machine that we want to make smarter, then how are we going to balance the purpose of providing data that train and with human help and engineering and designing the machine learning and the experience and the delegation, the anticipation, get us to a better place while we balance this with privacy? So let's take a peek and see if we have any questions from the audience. I suspect that we do. Anytime we have you on stage, there's always people wanting to ask various things. So here we go. For Fred, should IU be a leader in asserting this vision of data and policy, or is it safer for us to wait and see what others do and move incrementally?
So yes, is the answer.
You are a lawyer, I can tell.
Yeah. And the next question? No. So yes, we should absolutely be a leader. I don't think this is an area where you necessarily gain a lot by going out and talking about being a leader, because then you just invite controversy. I think it's better to walk the walk before you start talking the talk. And so to say, what we're talking about here, let's just face it. You totally could disagree with every word I've said. It doesn't bother me one bit. But you're wrong, because the volume of data flow and use is so great that no individual can meaningfully control it. So we basically have 3 options. We had the let individuals control it. That's completely not workable, because there's this massive volume of data flows. We can have the let the institution make rational, thoughtful, well-documented decisions, or we could just say let's have it be out of control entirely, which is largely where we are today in many sectors of the economy. And so rather than going back to this thing, industry, by the way, loves consent because they can do anything under consent. It's a wonderful thing, but it would be much better for us to, if you will, take what I would call the high road and say, look, we are going to use data aggressively to benefit the public, to benefit our students, our graduates, our faculty, and the public, because we are a public university, for God's sake. But in doing that, we're going to build in meaningful privacy protections, not this gibberish from 40 years ago that didn't even work then. We're going to build in privacy protections that work in a highly advanced AI-driven age. And that's going to focus more on thoughtful processes that make sure these issues get raised early and taken into account early, on verifiability, can we live up to our promises, and then ultimately on some type of redress, because we will make mistakes. And when those mistakes happen, I was at Notre Dame on Friday. Thursday, I drove over from Chicago. I got to the toll booth there, the so-called Notre Dame toll booth. They had a bandwidth problem, so there are 5 machines that were taking cash, were taking 4 minutes a car to process a ticket. So you'd put the ticket in and it would kick it back out. You'd put the ticket in and it would kick it back out. And then you would press the help button and you could listen to this recording, help is on the way. But there was no help to be found. So there we were, lines of cars as far back as you would imagine. When you got to the toll booth, the 5 of us were each standing outside of our cars, looking around. Where's the help that's on the way? We could each hear the other's machine saying, help is on the way. And had help actually been on the way, that automated toll booth wouldn't have been a problem. The failure of that automated toll booth is that somebody installed a button that doesn't call for help. It just plays you a recording. And so what we have to make sure we do is ensure that there actually is help on the way when something goes wrong.
So a number of questions came in about the European regulation and GDPR. And the question is GDPR and AI, are they fundamentally opposed to each other? Advancement of AI fundamentally opposed.
I think it's almost impossible to see otherwise. Now, GDPR took 3 years to negotiate, and it was a very political process. You remember that there's a 3-part system in the EU, and it had to pass
General
all
Data
3 parts.
Protection Regulation.
Exactly.
Right?
And so It's very ambitious, but what it ended up being was sort of a Christmas tree. So it has all of the 1980 principles still there, but added to that are things like risk management, that's good, accountability, that's good, data review boards, that's good. If you could have gotten the new stuff and gotten rid of the old stuff, it would be terrific. But because they've kept everything, it's just a giant tar pit waiting for somebody to get caught in, and that will be AI developers who get caught there first.
So here's a pretty direct one. Personally identifiable information, PII, is, quote, the toxic asset of the 21st century. Even with the best of intentions, organizations have shown a lack of ability to safeguard and control it, resulting in breach after breach. How will IU lead in this area, and how can, quote, the smart machine help?
So first of all, I think all information today is PII. That's one of the things that big data and artificial intelligence between them have made true. So, we can identify machines today by looking at their font library and the order in which the fonts were added. We can identify people by looking at completely non-personally identifiable things, but because of supercomputing, the fact we save all this data, we connect it, we don't at the university, but the world does, we bring it together. So pretty much everything is PII, and I think we should probably lose that distinction except for when we mean very specific things, like medical records may be a different type of PII, and we do have a different name. We call this PHI, Protected Health Information. So given this fact, I think, A, we need to protect everything. There's no longer any reason to say this is sensitive and this is not. We can put it all together. We used to say age was sensitive, or gender was sensitive, or race was sensitive. We can figure that out without ever asking those questions. And in some ways, the AI is going to do it whether we want it to or not. And so therefore, we should protect it all. Again, we should make sure that we're not making claims that we can't live up to. And so if we say your data is adequately protected, or if we say we will never use it for marketing, or if we say we will never share it with a third party unless it is anonymized, and of course you can't really anonymize, but you can try, then we got to make sure we have the monitoring systems to live up to those claims. And those claims, by the way, they're important not just as a condition for consent, because as you know, I don't care much about consent. They're important because you're doing the ethical thing. I mean, that's exactly what we're saying is, look, we decided we could use this data because the purposes were so good. That means we can't use it for purposes that are less good.
Yeah, that is the position that my good friend and colleague at Purdue, Jerry, has taken up there. They've worked through their process, they've discussed it, and they're saying, we have this data and we can use it for the good that is the mission of the university. And particularly in aggregating the data and studying it, most of it, of course, is anonymized at that point. And I do think that, I applaud some of the work that they're doing there because they are driving some outcomes that matter in terms of student retention, student effectiveness, et cetera. I think we have a lot to figure out about this. Maybe time for just one more question, and a particularly fun one. What do you guys drink, and do you really get that wound up when you're out debating this? The answer is yes. We won't disclose the beverage, but yes, we actually do, because I always learn something when I get a moment to sit down with Dr. Fred Cate. Thank you, Fred.
Thank you.
Thanks.